pull up a chair. If you haven't already, hit subscribe before we start, because there's always another one of these waiting for you. Tonight's story is about a woman named Renee Sutton and a car she bought for herself from a stranger that turned out to already know her better than she expected. Renee had been looking for a reliable used sedan for weeks, something practical for the commute to her job as an insurance claims adjuster. And when a listing popped up 2 towns over at a fair price, low mileage, one previous owner, she drove out that same afternoon and bought it on the spot. It wasn't until the following weekend, cleaning out the glove compartment before her first oil change, that she found a small spiral notebook wedged behind the owner's manual. She almost didn't open it. She was glad, later, that she did. The notebook was full of dates, times, and a single first name written over and over in the same handwriting. Diane, Tuesday, 6:15, Thursday, 5:30. A motel name Renee didn't recognize, listed a dozen times across 8 months. Renee sat in her own driveway for a long time before she noticed the small sticker on the inside of the driver's door, the kind dealerships leave behind, printed with a service history. The car's previous owner's name was right there in faded ink. Adam Sutton, her own husband. Renee was 37 years old, and after 9 years handling insurance claims, she had learned to read a paper trail the way other people read a room, noticing the detail that didn't match the story being told. Adam had told her, 8 months earlier, that he'd sold his old car to a stranger off an online listing. A private sale, cash only, quick and simple. She was about to learn that the car hadn't gone nearly as far as he'd let her believe. Renee and Adam had been married for 11 years, long enough that Renee had stopped double-checking the small inconsistencies that used to catch her attention early in their marriage. A missed call here, a vague answer there, the way you eventually trust the shape of a life you've built together instead of examining every plank of it. Adam worked in regional sales, often driving to meet clients across 3 counties, and Renee had never once thought to question the receipts he brought home, because questioning them had simply never occurred to her as something a good marriage required. She didn't confront him that night, and if you've ever had to build a claim file before presenting it to anyone, you already know exactly why she waited. She didn't cry, and she didn't call the dealership demanding answers. Instead, she did what she did every day at work, quietly and methodically. She ran the vehicle identification number through a public records service she used for claims verification and pulled the car's full ownership history. It had passed through exactly 1 used car lot between Adam and Renee, sitting on the lot for less than 3 weeks before she happened to find the listing. A coincidence so unlikely she almost laughed reading it, if it hadn't also been the thing confirming everything else. She cross-referenced the motel name from the notebook against Adam's old expense reports from work, the ones he'd once shown her proudly as proof of how organized he kept his business travel, and found 4 entries, over the same 8 months, listing meetings in a town 20 minutes from that exact motel. Meetings Renee now understood had never actually been about work at all. She thought about every one of those work trips differently now, replaying dinners where Adam had mentioned a client meeting running long, a hotel with bad water pressure, small forgettable details that had never seemed worth remembering until they suddenly explained themselves 8 months too late. She spent a full week building the file the way she'd build any claim, quietly, methodically, gathering everything before presenting a single piece of it, because she had learned professionally that a claim presented too early, before it was complete, was a claim that could be argued apart piece by piece. She found 3 more names buried in old text message backups Adam had never bothered to fully delete from a cloud account she still technically had access to from when they'd shared a family plan years earlier. Diane appeared the most, spanning the longest stretch of time, but she wasn't the only one. Renee printed everything. She made copies of the copies and kept a set at her sister's house, an old habit from work she'd never expected to need at home. She sat with that thought longer than she expected to, turning the notebook over in her hands before deciding that the only fair thing to do, professionally and personally, was to gather everything completely before she said a single word to him. She also pulled the car's maintenance records from the dealership, matching oil changes and tire rotations against the dates in the notebook, and found that Adam had been unusually diligent about keeping the car serviced during exactly the months the notebook covered, the kind of careful upkeep a person only bothers with when a vehicle matters to them more than they're willing to explain. She finally sat Adam down at their kitchen table on a Sunday evening, the notebook and the printed records laid out between them, in the same order she would lay out evidence for any claim she'd ever built. Adam's face moved through the same stages Renee had watched 100 times across a claims desk, denial sliding slowly into resignation once he understood exactly how much she already had. "I bought a car last month," Renee said quietly, before he could try to explain any of it away. "I didn't know it was going to be an investigation, but it turned out to be the most honest thing you ever gave me, even though you didn't mean to." Adam didn't deny any of it. He said he'd sold the car because he was afraid Renee would eventually find something in it, never once imagining she would end up owning it again anyway, buying back, without knowing it, the exact evidence he thought he'd finally gotten rid of. Adam sat with his hands flat on the table for a long moment before answering, staring at the notebook like it was a stranger's handwriting instead of his own. He said the affair with Diane had ended almost a year earlier, but that by the time it did, he no longer knew how to explain any of it without unraveling everything else alongside it. So he'd simply kept driving the same car, quietly, until it felt easier to get rid of the car than to ever get rid of the truth. Renee's sister, the same one who had unknowingly kept a set of copies in her hallway closet for a week without asking why, later told her that hearing the whole story felt like watching Renee solve one of her own work cases, calm and unbothered, right up until the very end. Renee filed for divorce 3 weeks later, and for once in her professional life, she didn't need to build a case slowly. The notebook alone did most of the work. Adam moved out within the month, and the divorce, when it finally came, was almost embarrassingly straightforward, built on paperwork so thorough that neither lawyer needed to argue much of anything. She kept the car, oddly enough, once it was fully paid off and legally hers, and had it detailed properly for the first time, replacing the seats, cleaning out every trace of the life it used to carry before it became simply hers, a small, ordinary car that happened to tell her the truth when nobody else would. A year later, Renee still keeps that spiral notebook in a drawer at home, not because she needs the reminder, but because she told me it was the strangest gift anyone had ever accidentally given her, proof that sometimes the truth doesn't need you to go looking for it at all. Sometimes it just needs you to buy the right car. She still finds the whole thing strangely funny sometimes, in the way only true stories manage to be, that the very thing Adam thought he'd erased ended up parked in her own driveway, service records and all, waiting patiently for someone competent enough to actually read it. So tell me, whoever's listening tonight, do you think Adam ever imagined the car would end up back in his own driveway? Or do you think some secrets are simply built to find their way home eventually? I'd love to know what you think, so leave it in the comments. And if this story caught you off guard the way it caught Renee off guard, give it a like before you go. Pull up a chair again next week, and I'll tell you another one. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.